let's flash back to 1985 when the Roland S50 came out. You had 15 seconds in total that you could sample. Yes, I'm quiet. 15 seconds. The sampling. Something that we take for granted now so easily. But you have to understand the beauty of what sampling is and how complicated this process is. I needed a sound voice in this industry. Therefore, I realized right from the beginning, I need to build my own sample libraries. And that's why we've gotten to the point to do my own brass library together with Orchestral tools. I feel Orchestral Tools is the company that has the system down into the detail. Their interface is fantastic. Their sample cutting is fantastic. The way that samples interact with one another, the playability, that for me was the main reason why I picked Orchestral Tools. And this is a really, really great collaboration between the two of us. Sound has always been the major inspiration to make music. What I want you to feel when you open up this sample library and you play your first line is you want to make music like straight away. That's how inspired you should be when you play this instrument.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome to the stage, Tom Hockenborg. Okay, so I have some questions for you.
Shoot.
You came into composing from the world of industrial noise and electronic music. At what age did you fall in love with classical instrumentation, and has it always been with you?
Actually, since I was really young, my mom was a violin teacher and a music teacher. My dad was a harmonica player. Music was part of our family. Everybody played multiple instruments. My dad would play the Beatles and Elvis primarily, and my mom would play classical music. So I just grew up with it, and it was not until 94, 95, roughly, where I'm completely self-taught. Everything in music. I had drum lessons, guitar lessons when I was young, but I drove the teachers absolutely mad because I never studied whatever they wanted me to study. Nevertheless, in 94, 95, I felt like I was hitting let's say, harmonic and melodic ceiling, and that's when I really realized it's like, well, I have to really start studying to open up my mind to new possibilities, and I've done vigorously so. I'm an insomniac, so I've got hours to kill at night. So great for studying or binge watching, stuff on Netflix. It's awesome.
That's amazing. Now, when you talk about importance of sampling in that introduction video, how important has it been to your work, and how you use libraries in your work?
Well, I'm 50 now, and so it meant that I was in my teens when the first sampler came out that people could afford. Wow. There was the Synclavier, there was the Fairlight. But you needed $1 million or $2 million bucks. That was not going to work, in the countryside of Holland where I grew up. So the Mirage came out like in the early 80s, which was my first sampler, and the second one was the S50 that I talked about here in this video with a whooping 15-second sampling time and a 2-minute load. But boy, were these amazing instruments, and it opened up my mind like completely. From that point on, I would say sampling has been my most important instrument. And I call it an instrument. So from very early on, I started sampling my own sample libraries. Like right away, I have my own drum kits and my bass guitar instruments, whatever. And then when I came to LA and I got into film scoring, what I also mentioned in the video is like sound for me is like the most important inspiration to make music. I'm not a paper and pencil guy, and I really respect people that are. You know, they sit down in a park and they write like a minute of music a day or 2 minutes. I find it fascinating. But I need to be inspired by sounds, and it could come from anywhere. I just finished a film where a sound that was in there was inspired by a garbage truck that basically drove by, and it rumbled the whole building, and I was like, that's it. And then I had one of my assistants look for that garbage truck sound for 2 weeks. I drove him just completely mad. But he found it, and then I make music with that. So cut to orchestral instruments. For me, it's actually the same thing. If you open up a library and you need to write something for a flute or for a violin or for a church organ, if you will, if you're not a pencil and paper guy who has a perfect understanding how this will work out in the real world, you need to be inspired by a sound. So if you load a flute sample that sounds absolutely terrible, I mean, how are you going to write the melody of your life? And I have a serious issue with that. And I think a lot of people out there. So for me, it's so important that things sound so incredibly good, like straight out of the box. And therefore, you know, I found it very important to, you know, develop a library like this.
Amazing. So what did you feel was missing from the industry, and what did you want to achieve with this library?
Well, I mean, like, where do you start? I mean, you know, first off, I have the highest regards for anybody over the last 30 years that have or pioneered or is making at this point sample libraries. If I were wearing a hat, I would take the hat off for you all, because you guys doing fantastic work. And most of the composers in this town or anywhere in the world would not know what to do if these sample libraries were not available for us to make. So I want to point that out first. Second, I felt that brass instruments was the one instance where I think we can really, really improve. And the ideas that I had about how to build a brass library. How do you build a brass library that is great for people that write 100% orchestral music? How do you build a brass library that is great for people that want to sound like Hans Zimmer, for instance? How do you build a brass library that can be used by hip-hop producers? How do you build a brass library that can be used by people that are very sound design in nature? Like, what needs to happen for Trent Reznor to use a brass library? So all these things were really like playing in my mind, and I came up with this whole concept together with the wonderful developers of Orchestral tools, and I'm very excited that, you know, at a certain point this thing is going to be done. We're still working on it, by the way.
So power and versatility, right?
Absolutely.
You are not a traditional composer. Where does brass sit in your composition process, and why did you want to start building your library from brass?
Well, yes, I wouldn't say I'm a traditional composer. I call myself a full contact composer, which I need to hold something. I need to play. I need to play with something, so I use a lot of instruments in my studio, where it's like modular synths or synthesizers or real guitars or bass guitars, percussion instruments, whatnot. I really tried, but it's almost impossible to find the best 40 brass players on the planet and stick them in one bedroom, just keep them there for a couple of years. You know, it's pretty hard. So you actually need to do this with a brass library. And for me, that was very important to get it really right and to get it really inspirational. Because I'm not a traditional composer, I look at each element of the orchestral family also, as from a production side point of view, it's like when I need like a certain sound or a certain frequencies. Oh, this could be taken care of by the strings, or this could be taken care of by woodwinds, or this could be taken care of by brass. Besides the fact that I usually get asked to score films where the sound needs to be like larger than absolutely life, and Mad Max is a good example, or Batman versus Superman, or the movie coming out in 2 weeks, Alita: Battle Angel, and I felt that existing brass libraries were not giving what I'm looking for, but especially the versatility. Like I want to be very clear. I don't want to build a brass library that is like, oh, when you buy that, you can do a Mad Max score, or you can do this. No, this needs to be a library that caters to everybody. You know, from the smallest sounding emotional trumpet to like the biggest horn section you ever dreamed of on the planet to have in your film score. So it needs to cover everything.
Wow.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. So I know you've studied so much of film score genre and orchestral history. What are the golden ages of brass in film composition, and why?
I mean, brass is like everywhere. I mean, especially for me, it started actually the late 1800s into the early 20th century with fantastic composers like Mahler, Bruckner, the Russian composers. What they were able to do with brass and the violent quality that it had at times, that's really where for brass at least the seeds were being planted that we would then later hear in film scoring. I would say I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but the first Max Steiner score for the first King Kong movie was incredible. The way that Bernard Herrmann used brass in his Hitchcock films, but also a bunch of other films. Then a secret pleasure of mine is the first Dracula movie from the 60s. This is like an English composer who was actually born in 18-something, and he did one or two Dracula movies and then he died. So it wasn't really like he was starting a career. It was like, it was kind of the end of it. But the way that brass was being used in that is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And obviously what happened, later, the way that John Williams introduced the orchestra back into film in the late 70s. The way that Hans Zimmer took a spin on what to do with brass, and the most exceptional in that world is obviously the Inception score. So and then brass has been everywhere, just like all the time. So for me, it was important that we need really good brass libraries and very versatile brass libraries.
Great. So why did you choose Orchestral Tools versus anybody else as your collaboration partner for this library? I will say a thing or two about it, but just watch the couple of videos that we just saw. I mean, like, these guys, in my humble opinion, are light years ahead when it comes to design and flexibility of sounds. What I said in the video, the sample cutting, the way that the instruments have playability, and the fact these are like the nicest guys on the planet to work with, which is an important thing for me too. But it's especially the quality of the product, the way that they take things extremely serious. That was like very, very important for me. Amazing. And what did you like about the recording process in Berlin?
Well, what is there not to like about Berlin? It's just it's a great town. It has a really rich history in making music and performing music. For who is not familiar, the Berlin Philharmonic for 50, 60 years has been the top orchestra in the world. Actually beaten every now and then by the Dutch orchestra, the Concertgebouw Orchestra, who has been, it's the Dutch-German thing. It's like with classical music and soccer, but other than that, we're cool. Right? Anyway, there's a really rich history there, and the amount of players there are fantastic. Also, Berlin is packed with 3-4 classic studios. Germany, by history, also has been very innovative when it comes to building preamps, building microphones. I only need to mention companies like Neumann and Sennheiser, Telefunken. So there's so much knowledge in Germany when it comes to recording and playing instruments. So it wasn't such a hard choice, actually.
Great. Tom Hunkelberg, Junkie XL, everybody.
Thank you very much.
What an amazing news. Just FYI, for the latest updates about Junkie XL brass can be found on jxlbrass.orchestraltools.com. So feel free to subscribe for further news right there.